Hello, welcome to the Healthtech Marketing Show. I'm your host, Adam Chirinas. I'm the CEO of Health Launchpad, one of the two companies that brings this podcast out. The other is our longtime sponsors, the awesome group from HIMSS. So today's show is about an issue that we all are going to encounter at some point. I know I've been through it a couple of times, and that's what happens when you lose your job. Either, you're dismissed, you've been riffed, you've left of your own volition. And so it's that painful process that you have to go through to get back into a new opportunity, a new job. And to do this, I've got two folks to help me with this. Somebody I've known for about 20 years, Fred Mather. Fred is an executive, a longtime sales executive, who's also one of the members of membership team of a group called Pavilion, she'll talk a little bit about. And then somebody I've known for a year and had the pleasure of working with, Erik Johnson, who is a long-time Healthtech marketing leader. So with that, I'm going to welcome you both to the stage. Hello, Erik, and hello, Fred. Nice to see you both. Good.
Yeah, good to see you.
Erik,
Thanks for having us, Adam.
Oh, it's great to have you here. Erik, why don't you spend a minute so just to talk a little bit about your background, and then you, Fred.
Sure. Thanks, Adam. Great to be on the podcast today. As mentioned, I've been in healthcare IT for the better part of 20 years. Prior to that, I kind of had an interesting journey into how I ended up in health tech. Started in sales, in industrial tech, kind of worked my way through some operational roles into software. And then, not to date myself too much, but right around meaningful use, I found myself working for a big company, Wolters Kluwer, working on ingesting order sets into the first versions of EHR systems. And from there, worked in product marketing, marketing leadership, international business development, larger commercial roles for large companies like that, as well as startup environments. And so have had the pleasure then throughout that journey to be a part of many different types of HIT communities, of which most recently has been Health Launchpad. So excited to join the group today and talk about my journey.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fred, how about you?
Well, somewhat of a similar path to Erik. I've taken more of a sales-oriented approach to my career in tech. I've worked for a variety of companies across several industries, including touching healthcare and pharma. Mostly B2B, B2B2C, really product market fit forward. Plenty of successes, thankfully, but plenty of failures too. I think I share all of the experiences up and down relative to being in SaaS technology. For the last 6-7 years, really two main things: consulting, really go-to-market advice, sort of returning to where I was in a full-time operating role, helping companies figure out the best way forward for themselves. And then secondly, as Adam briefly touched on, I'm the exec vice chair for a community membership group called Pavilion. We do a lot of things. Fundamentally, we're focused on helping people develop their careers. The two main sort of thrusts of what I'm involved in is, one, executive compensation. I help people negotiate and find the best way to get the best package for themselves at that point in the job search process. And also very relevant to today, I run the On the Bench group, which is, as it sounds, a group which is designed, or at least a group which is served by us, providing service to help them get back into work.
Yes, I've heard so many great things about it, and I've got to know some people who've been through that. It's really valuable. Let's start with, the kind of the most painful part of the journey, which is the moment where you realize you are on the bench. And so this happens to all of us. It's happened to me a couple of times. It's pretty horrible when it happens. Maybe you could both give a perspective on some advice for anybody listening to this. It's like, when it happens to you, how do you come to terms with it? Erik, if you've experienced that, and I think you have, and so what did you go through?
Yeah, absolutely. Whether planned or unplanned, right? There's emotion involved, right? There's a realization of things that all of a sudden that you realize that you wish you had been doing to find your next opportunity that you probably haven't. As most of us experience the fact that we're pretty busy in our day-to-day lives. So then you think about, all right, so what am I going to do now that helps me find that next opportunity? And there's a lot of learning involved. And what are the resources and things you need to tap into that you quite frankly just haven't been paying attention to? And let's face it, most of us are not thinking about it. And when it happens, then you really need to understand and figure out how to accelerate the process, right? And so it's a complex navigation process that's sometimes can be a bit overwhelming, requires thoughtful planning. And most of us feel the sense of, all right, how am I going to break this down and make it be productive, knowing that the end state is usually undefined, right? And so therefore, we're governed by the fact that it's a little bit of you're navigating the unknown. How do you come to terms with making sure that you're driving in somewhat of a straight line when it really just feels like a bowl of spaghetti in a zigzag? And the more things that you do, the better off you begin to feel about how you're driving in a prescribed path. But initially, it feels like a complete bowl of spaghetti, right? And of course, it changes for everyone a little bit. But I generally feel like for all the folks that I've had a chance to meet, you're all kind of experiencing a similar set of circumstances in terms of, all right, now I have all this information. How do I navigate it?
Fred, how about you?
Yeah.
Perspectives on that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, listen, we're not here to judge the variety of situations that people find themselves in when they lose a job and what their requirements are to get back into work. And they could be financial, they could be personal objectives. There can be a lot of inputs that put you there. But I think there is a tendency, certainly speaking as a salesperson here, to be overreactive to what is in front of you. It's I'm out of work, I need to get back into work. And I think the word plan, I think that Erik touched on a couple of times there, is probably most important. We are in, as always a point this will be of the whole podcast, in an environment today that is now entirely employer driven relative to finding new work. And it's a dynamic in tech which really hasn't existed for the better part of the last 15 years. People have been able to find jobs relatively simply. If one company chose not to hire you, there was a queue of others that were in line that were prepared to take you. Well, that's all changed. And so the necessity of putting a plan together as to how you're going to work, which I think we'll probably dig more into here, is absolutely essential. And the historical reactive approach of jumping into a few recruiters, not that they can't be helpful to you, is probably not going to yield the same type of outcome that it would have done 2 years and the 15 years previous to that. So this thought around a plan and getting yourselves oriented and organized around what the ingredients of that plan are just absolutely crucial to find the best job today.
Mm-hmm. And Fred, maybe build on that. It's like, what do you think you should do first?
Well, I think the first thing you do is take a breath and try get over whatever mental stress, if that's impacting you, that is causing you to quickly jump in. I think from a practical standpoint, there's a lot of layers of detail that sit beneath this. The first thing to do is to establish what it is that you bring, documented in experience, skills, everything that profiles the ingredients of what you bring successfully that could be contributory towards the new employment that you seek. And I think you need to match that then with your values. What are the things that are important to you? What are the conditions that you're going to apply to the types of companies that you're going to go and work for? And then the next part of it really is to take those things, and this might be a lot experience-based in terms of the companies you've worked at in the past, to seek out through research, maybe from your network, what are the list of companies that you think you might be the best fit for? They might be industry-based, it might be geo-based, it might be sales motion-based, it might even be innovation-based, tied to things like cyber, which are doing really well today, or obviously, AI. And then to do more proactive outreach to those organizations that, as a first objective, is really to get conversations, expand your network that, of course, can bleed into employment. And I'm not saying that you don't do the effort around talking to recruiters as well, but what I just defined there at a pretty high level is you taking control over the steps and, most importantly, the profile, the types of organizations that you want to work for, that you think you're the best fit for, versus, hey, recruiter, let me apply, or let me look at these companies that you've got in your bag or your roster of opportunities, that then determines, really, am I the best fit for, versus actually taking control over it.
Erik, you do first.
Well, yeah, to build off what Fred said, this is clearly a process that does require taking a breath, right? And being thoughtful about what your next steps are going to be. And that could mean a lot of things, right? And, the things that I think about as I reflect back a bit, particularly is almost approaching this process just pretty much like you would go about trying to build up a sales and marketing funnel, right? And the realities of what you experience along the way are not that indifferent in trying to sell into some of these challenging health systems in this particular job market, just simply because the dynamics, whether you know it or not, are very different than they have been in the past. Being on the hiring side in the past, in particular, and searching for great candidates, which is a challenge, this market is pretty different. And learning what that means and there's so much information of which you need to sort through that, that becomes noisy, right? There's a lot of noise out there. And so therefore, understanding what inputs have and following the strongest signals, looking at, and I'm just going to go ABM here, looking through these intent signals, right? To really help better understand where is my value prop resonating right now as I begin to look at the targeted type companies that I feel like I bring the most value to in the types of industries. So therefore, when I have the opportunity to pitch that particular organization or introduce myself, you're going to really bring something that is a strong fit to them. And it does require doing the research. The challenge becomes it's really easy to get distracted, right? And it's easy to kind of fall into a normal pattern that would say that the first thing I should do is go to LinkedIn and start just consuming as much LinkedIn job info as possible, of which you'll find out, which you can spend an entirely tremendous amount of time on, only to be disappointed with with the type of response that you're going to get. And so while that might be a part of your plan, the plan needs to be multi-level with the whole idea, and we'll probably get into this a little bit later, is it all has to result in building up your pipeline. Because the fact of the matter is, even once you get engaged in a process, these processes are taking a really long time. And therefore, the importance of being involved in as many conversations as possible is really the game. Because even from the point that you might engage with the hiring manager of a real position, that process may take at minimum probably 4 to 6 to 8 weeks. And so you need to have multiple opportunities in the fire in the event that one will fall out. Because as we all know, as sales and marketing people, not all your opportunities are going to result in close-won deals, right? In fact, you're going to need 3 to 4 times as many opportunities for the one that actually will. And so operating with that mindset would tell you exactly how you should work. And I followed that, and I still believe it. And so anyway, that's a little bit about how I've approached it.
It's a very helpful framework, Matt, because I like your analogy with ABM, because you can see where you're progressing, and you have to sort of make an honest assessment of whether or not opportunity A is really going to progress, and therefore do you really need to double up and get some more opportunities in the pipeline. Brett, I mean, you've got such a strong sales background. I'm curious to know what you think about that. I just actually want to ask a little question though as well, which is, what advice do you give to people on the bench about how you let people know? I've seen people put out on LinkedIn, hey, I just got laid off, I'm available for work. Sometimes that looks a bit weird, but I can tell you that I ended up hiring one of the best people on my team because they did that. So I'm just curious to know what you advise people in terms of what do you do, how you let your network know?
Well, the first thing is, this is a much debated topic, by the way, is around whether or not you put open to work around your image on LinkedIn. I'm not going to be here to take sides on that, but I think the common best advice is no, except for recruiters. And there is a setting within LinkedIn which allows it to be clear that you're open to work to them versus the wider audience. I don't know. There's a historical negativity, unfair or not, that says that companies would prefer to hire somebody who is already employed than somebody who is out of work. Listen, in this environment with the people that are out of work, hopefully people have taken a slightly more kind of view of that. But that's the first thing. I think and I'm going to stick just sort of to the social media aspect of the question. I think it is a really great opportunity for you to get busy on LinkedIn. I mean, I know you're extremely active on LinkedIn, Adam, and relative to somebody who is looking for work, it's an opportunity for you to get socially active and to be extolling, views and opinions about areas of your expertise and experience. From a grandstanding opportunity, it's purely a giving perspective. And I think it bleeds into the importance of being guided by willing to offer help as part of the process of the search. In other words, sure, you have the end objective of seeking employment, but the steps that will get you there will involve a huge amount of conversation with a variety of different people that supports network expansion. But those conversations themselves will drive your desire to get introduced to other people, to get forwarded on to others. And if you do the research that I think Erik touched on to learn about the individuals, the companies you're talking to, it allows you to lead with help relative to a perspective on the business or a problem that you've researched, that the CEO's spoken to, social media or elsewhere, that you actually believe you've got some advice and help that you can offer. And leading with help can result in a few things. One, it can provide those introductions that I just referenced into other people based upon the individual you spoke to. It could restart a position that was put on hold, which is not unlikely in this current environment because they've seen something attractive in you that has made them think there's actually a reason now to bring it back to life. Or they can simply say, great, this is a fantastic individual. This is a position we need to fill for. We should just start with looking at this candidate and others to fill the role. So leading with help, using networking as an enabler for that, and using LinkedIn as a way to sort of advertise and expose all that you have and what you can bring is incredibly important as a constituent to support that.
I think that ties in so well with what Erik was saying earlier about taking a very sort of targeted pipeline development approach, which is back to what you were saying earlier on, Fred, about having a sort of targeted list of companies or types of organizations, and then using LinkedIn as a way to outreach to them and to nurture relationships. And to your point, you don't know what you're going to open up. Suddenly, maybe they may not have an advertised position. Suddenly you find yourself in a conversation you didn't know it was going to happen. Or they may even say, hey, I'd love to have a chat with you, get to know you, and say, you know what, I know about another position that's happening. So on that point, and maybe Fred, you could lead off on this. How do you look for new opportunities?
Well, I mean, without going to repeat here, I would encourage people to get in front of the recruiters for sure. I mean, listen, just purely from the point of view of being able to network and have conversations too. And listen, you might opportunistically get successful with that. As Erik said, I mean, good luck with the job boards. There are just hundreds, in some cases, thousands of applications. And once your resume gets, pushed through an ATS system and elsewhere, the chances of you getting progress on that, good luck. Brilliant if you do, but it's unlikely. If you're going to Erik's point about following a more go-to-market approach and the sort of filtering through the sales funnel, you're unlikely to get all the way down the track there. So it's really about taking control of your search. And that search is going to come really with identifying those companies, as already mentioned, that you should go out to and start to get in the middle of conversations. Maybe one sort of adjacent point that I think we found through on the bench at Pavilion that's been extremely valuable is that there is a little bit of a weird one relative to the value of the sections of your network that can be most important to you. I think typically people would say that their primary network, their first connections, are the people that are most likely to help them. But we've discovered it's actually the secondary network. And the value of a bigger secondary network is there are going to be way more people you can get attached to. And I don't have a perfect reason for this, but I think it's bedded in this, which is that your first connections don't want to let you down. And so they're going to be a little bit more reticent about making introductions that actually don't bear fruit for you. Whereas a secondary network person is obligated to the person that you know, but not to you. And so therefore, if they make introductions and they don't work out, it's really not on them. And so if you think about the interplay between first and secondary connections, there's just so much more scope then as a result of that to get in front of people that can help you. I think the other part of all this is sort of becoming a student during your time of looking for work, particularly for those that are unemployed. Get to school. We have a whole curriculum that people will jump into at Pavilion. Master a craft that you never did. It could be personal or professional. It will boost your confidence. It will give you good distraction. Focus time on the family. These are all inputs that give you variety while you're looking for a search and perhaps continue and support the confidence that you need. But they also improve your craft and skills relative to what you're going to be like in the next job. And I think that could be really appealing. Some do consultancy too. It can be really appealing to hiring companies as a way to sort of build up the profile of who you are and the credentials you'll want to convey once you're interviewing.
Erik, when we caught up recently, you were telling me about some of the things that you did to keep busy, but make yourself more attractive, but also some of the resources that you tapped into that other people that was surprised you.
Yeah. Fred mentioned tapping into the secondary network, right? And it's extremely important because, again, you sort of go through your levels of hierarchy of network, right? And your natural reactions, of course, are LinkedIn, first level connections. And then if you go through that, then you're into the, okay, so now what, right? And that's really where the next level of work begins. And it's because it's from there that you're really going to actually begin to engage with people that can help you, right? Because this is all about really finding others that you can help and having them help you while you reciprocate. And it's really that's the biggest part of the process. And it comes with a bit of a philosophy, which is a little bit of a learning exercise, right? Because it's not necessarily how you come oriented into this process. However, the quicker that people can become oriented that way, the faster that connections are going to be made, and the faster that people are going to be willing to understand what your value prop is and be willing to take your value prop onto their network, right? Because that's really what this is about. And it's particularly those second level connections to those other people that you don't know yet, but yet might be plugging in and finding a new executive network locally, right? Plugging into an HIT community or working within a local HIMSS chapter, all of which are things that I have done and have become involved in, and they've all benefited me greatly. But on top of that, there's other things that help also begin to change your narrative for a variety of reasons, right? So as Fred mentioned, looking into secondary education options for a lot of reasons nowadays, right? According to particular topics can be of tremendous value. And I've been working with machine learning and AI technology for quite a long time. The challenge is actually today is finding really good structured education that can help synthesize in a way related to use cases that even can take people that have been working with tech and begin to understand exactly, all right, well, how am I going to augment what I think I know versus what I believe the market wants? And so I actually spent some time and did some secondary certificate education through MIT, which I found tremendously valuable. But it also changes your narrative too, in terms of how you're perceived online with the coursework that you're taking, the level of seriousness that you're investing in this particular tech to augment. And arguably something that, really this is the kind of stuff that becomes hard to do, depending on your job, where you're trying to find capacity for these types of secondary resources. In addition to that, what I also will say, and I didn't know this until, again, I engaged with people that were secondary connections, that there are resources typically in your state government that will help you pay for these secondary courses, right? So it wasn't until I connected with a few folks in my network that were going back to school. And again, these are VP C-suite executives that are investing in AI tech through reputable firms, and yet having it being paid for through their local services, and investigating into something like a dislocated workers program, which they have in the state of Minnesota, is one of those pieces of advice that is extremely important, because those resources exist. You can tap into them, and they are there to help you and facilitate that process if you choose to utilize them. So again, All of that for me, I found out through people that I didn't know and ended up establishing those connections. They've been able to help me. And in turn, I've been able to pass that along and introduce opportunities to them. Again, you've got to get down to those level of connections and be willing to put yourself out there that way to be able to do it. But that is the hardest part. Once you have that flywheel running, well, then now the system begins to work for you. But it's that creating that inertia to get there is probably the biggest challenge.
So Fred, any other ideas and resources that can help somebody looking for a job make themselves more valuable?
Yeah, well, it's a lot. I mean, we skirted quickly across tools. I would encourage, to Erik's point around, treating it as a funnel-based process that you tap into. You can put it in a Google Sheet, you can use a free HubSpot, but, have a CRM that's supporting, the interview process is a long one today. It can take a while. I mean, we're finding out, just to digress for 1 second, that it is not unusual for people at executive levels to be taking 6 months and longer than 12 months to find employment right now. There are some that are obviously less than that. And so if you're managing a lot of processes, companies that you're interviewing with, there's a lot of elements in that. So use a CRM to certainly support it. We've already talked about LinkedIn. We estimate within On the Bench that just about 50%, a bit more, take a coach. And I think that can be really, really helpful. There's a whole variety of different coaches. Is it somebody specific to resume writing? Is it actually had a position and demonstrate the value of a LinkedIn profile? My experience on that is most people assume that they have done it in a way that is being picked up in searches, and they find out that it's not. So that's a really inexpensive, hugely valuable investment from a coaching standpoint to get your LinkedIn sorted out. And then relative to preparing yourself to represent yourself in the best light, how to interview, how to give feedback. There are plenty of other elements that coaches can provide. There's also a ton of networking groups, not just places like Pavilion, but there's Lunch Club, which is an interesting tool for being able to get paired up based upon your profile with somebody who's a little bit of a similar peer set to you. So there's tons of places to go and find individuals that you can speak to. Plenty of optionality on the tool front for sure.
Those ideas. In fact, one thing occurred to me as you were saying that is that I've heard a lot of people complain about how recruiters or the hiring managers rather, are using AI to sift through zillions of resumes. And so if you're too old, if you're perceived as being too old, you're going to get filtered out. If you don't have the exact right things coming up on your resume or your LinkedIn profile, you're going to get filtered out. But what I loved about what you were both talking about there is maybe use the tools, search tools, coaching tools like Lunch Club, that are sort of new ways to network to overcome these issues and these biases. So those are very helpful suggestions. You covered how long the process takes. And I think that is the hardest thing maybe about this, is that where 6 months doesn't seem like a long time when you're working, because you always wish you got more done in those 6 months. But when you're out of work, 6 months is an eternity. And I think one of the things that you guys have both been saying that has really been eye-opening to me is this notion of your secondary network. And it's helped me to explain something that I've always struggled with. And I went through this. I saw my father go through this in the 70s of being put out of work. And then what you find is that the people, your primary network, sort of split into two. There are some people who just can't do enough for you. I mean, they are there for you. What can I do to help? They're proactive. And there are others that treat you like you've got a contagious disease. And it's painful, right? And there are folks that I stayed friends with them, but I wonder, why didn't you help me? And I think it's I think it was you, Fred, that was referring to, is that they don't want to let you down. So they're just putting off helping. The notion is that secondary people, the people who are sort of beyond your first degree connections, or people who are not the folks that you talk to a lot, it's much easier for them to help you because they've less invested in it. So it's a bit more transactional. Very helpful insight. So guys, as we wrap this up, any final tips that you've got for anyone out there looking for a new position on how to be successful, particularly be successful in the interview process? Erik, do you want to go first?
Yeah. I mean, it all starts certainly with, maintaining a positive attitude, right? This too will pass, right? And so therefore, it all represents ultimately how you continue to show up, have faith in the narrative that you put together and your skills that got you to that point, and focus in on those things that are your strengths, right? Because ultimately, that's what people want to hire you for. And believe it or not, as much as you think that sometimes people are going to want to care that much about that narrative, they really don't, right? They're still hiring you for you. They want to see authenticity. They want to make sure that you are who you are and that you come across that way, and that what's on the piece of paper and who you are gives them confidence that this is a person that I want in our organization. And so much of this is relied upon just how you present yourself during this time. And that's particularly important, right? It may take a little bit to get you there sometimes, and you might have to work through some things. And that's okay, because that'll be a part of that process. But when you are there, then you're ready, and employers will let you know that. And so for me, it is definitely keeping the faith. But probably the most important thing that I maintain is making sure that you're always there to continue to help other people, right? And the power of providing help, it's understated. Being there to help others and being able to receive help is really what actually most of what this is all about. And you can translate that right into sales and marketing, because at the end of the day, we're here to help solve problems. People want to help other people. That doesn't necessarily have to be just a business issue. It's a personal thing. And guess what? It's the secondary connections and those other folks. You'll be blown away at the number of people that want to help you, that don't really know you very well, but are there and can understand. And the amplification process is amazing. And of course, what that means is that you have to be there to help others too. And that's a gift, right? And being reminded of the gift that what you have to give to others, and also being able to pass that along, is something that this process reinforces and is a key reminder in just how good people are and how important it is to pass it along.
So amplify and empathize.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Fred, one thing I'd love it if you could talk a little bit about is how to prepare for disappointment. Because you may, we've all been through this where you think you're going to get it and then you hear you didn't. You never hear in some cases. How do you help coach folks on dealing with the disappointment?
Yeah. I just want to quickly add on one thing to what Erik said there, just on the interviewing side of things. I mean, the one good thing we should sort of span this entire conversation to is that if you ask any executive today, we've done some research through Pavilion, 73% said the top priority is go-to-market execution. So know that despite the paucity of available opportunities, the priority of what they want is the very position, if we're talking about commercial leadership here, that you provide a skill and a role for. One really tactical tip relative to the interviewing is when you get asked that inevitable question, tell me about yourself, don't fall into the trap of going into a bullet by bullet, blow by blow explanation of your resume. Storytelling, having a 3-5 sentence, 1 minute summary, as you did when we got going here, is absolutely critical. And then let them take you into that discussion. The other thing quickly I'll finally say before I answer your question, Adam, on dealing with disappointment is that, because it's an employer-driven market today, there is less willingness for non-specificity. Being theoretical in answers is just not going to take you far. And I have countless examples of candidates that hear back, you weren't in the detail enough or you weren't strategic enough. So they have to find the right balance between being higher and low level relative to what they speak to. And that is not a trivial thing to get right. But being very specific, let's talk about an example. If you're going to be asked about AI, which is probably a 99.9% you will, you can't just talk about AI in a generic sense. You have to talk about example applications of AI that will apply to cold outreach, to how you will do research. I mean, there is a whole selection of ways that AI is now being applied, some successfully or not inside organizations. You need to have a detailed perspective on that, not a high level, set of answers. On the issue of disappointment, the one bug I do have is, and it still persists today, is that the amount of relevant, helpful feedback, let alone feedback at all, in some cases that comes from companies back to candidates, is pitiful. And I know there are some HR areas that people don't want to cross relative to giving feedback that classifies people from an age. I think you already touched on that. There can be a variety of LGBTI, all the diversity issues can apply there. But please give them the feedback. They're disappointed they didn't get the job, but they want to learn as a way to be informed for what they next go through. Listen, it's easy for us to sit here in a podcast and talk about the fact that people need to get over the fact that they didn't get a job. The countless examples that I hear week in, week out do make people disappointed. But yes, if they are making progress and they are taking learnings themselves, self-reflective, meaning that they're not getting the feedback, that is what they use to continue to take the fight and to maintain the confidence to keep going. Take a breath, go and talk to your family, calm down. It's often not about you. It's often an internal candidate who's got much more internal DNA and value relative to the search. Get over it. But I understand why it can be confidence denting. These interview processes, as we've already said, take tons of time. It can involve many rounds of people. It can involve presentations and assignments. It can be difficult to get over the disappointment of not being selected. But yes, that's exactly what you have to try and do.
Very helpful. Guys, your perspective and insights have been so helpful and really actionable. I'm really looking forward to taking the podcast and actually turning it into a very actionable article, which I'll do in the next couple of weeks. I also want to make an offer. We recently launched a group called the Healthtech Marketing Network, which Erik is part of, has been part of for quite a while. We meet monthly. There's also an online platform. It's a community, private community for health tech marketing leaders. So directors, VPs, chief marketing officers. There are about 50 people now who are in the group. And one of the things that with the new platform that we're able to do is actually create a part of the site, a space in the site for job opportunities. And what's been wonderful has been seeing how many people have been sharing opportunities that they're hearing about. So that kind of the notion of the secondaries helping, paying it forward, seeing that in action. And I really think it's an opportunity out there. So if you're interested in that, you can find it through the website, which is healthlaunchpad.com, or you can DM me. Erik and Fred, anyway, you want people to be able to get hold of you if you want them to get hold of you. What's the best way to do that if they've got questions?
You can find me on LinkedIn for sure. My email is fred@advisewell.io. I'm always happy to take a conversation. Paying it forward is my mantra relative to what I'm doing inside Pavilion. I've been fortunate in my career. This is my opportunity to return it. I've been lucky enough to learn a lot with the colleagues that are around me in OTB. If there's any way that I can impart some of my knowledge to any of you, more than happy to have a conversation.
Yeah, and same thing, folks can reach me on LinkedIn. I've got all my credentials out there. Please reach out, right? And I'm happy to help. I know I can help you out there, so don't hesitate. Reach out and let's help you find that next great opportunity.
And it's Erik with a K and Johnson with no T. Guys, thank you so much. But let me wrap things up here with some basic podcast hygiene. If you're listening to the show and you'd like to see us, there's a YouTube video. There's also on the healthlaunchpad.com site, you'll find a blog post with all the actionable advice that you can get. So basically, this written up as a very actionable article. And if you're watching this, you want to subscribe to it, you can find us on your favorite podcast app. So again, thank you to you both for your insights. Thank you to anybody out there for listening. And thank you to my partners at HIMSS for all of your support. So with that, we'll bid you all adieu.